following is a story that took place quite a few years back now. However, it still baffles me completely, and I'd like to share it here. I'm a teenager, and I've been in scouting Boy Scouts for nearly all my life, and I really enjoy exploring with my friends and being trusted more as I'm older now. A few years ago, me and two girls named Amy and Harriet were asked to head into the woods surrounding our campsite to find a long, straight stick suitable for carving into a point. Bear in mind that I was a lot younger back then. Harriet was older and Amy only 1 year older than myself. We had been walking in deliberately the same direction as to not get lost, and memorizing the surroundings as we went, in order to find our way back easily. About 15 minutes in, we couldn't find anything to take back, so we turned around to return to the campsite. That's the initial panic set it. The trees had almost unnaturally knitted themselves together in such a way that it seemed our path was non existent in the first place, like it had just vanished. We looked around 360 degrees, and now everything looked exactly the same. Trees we could have sworn were different from one another appeared as all copies of the same tree. We kept walking in what we thought to be the correct direction, whilst shouting out for help, and eventually came to a concrete path, almost like a road, but very thin, separating the forest, splitting it into two. We didn't follow the road as it went in the wrong direction to our campsite. On the other side of the path was more forest. However, nearby was an abandoned shack, likely used for storage or whatever else. We had no idea anything like this was out here in these woods, so we just kept walking. We eventually came to a road we didn't recognize. A woman wearing a pink and purple regatta outdoors coat walked past, and we frantically asked her for the direction of our campsite, as by now, according to our watches and Harriet's phone, we'd been walking for an hour and a half. She said she'd never seen us before, but she said there's another campsite in that direction. We followed her advice and eventually came back to our campsite. We frantically apologized for being so long and that we couldn't find anything. The leader Ian could see all three of us were shaken up, and he stated confused that we'd only been gone 25 minutes and that our free time was still going on. To this day, this baffles all three of us, as our free time was 40 minutes long, and our watches and phones had said we'd been gone for hours. The forest we were lost in felt crushing and claustrophobic, like we'd entered an area that the concept of time didn't apply to. I believe in the paranormal, however, this was so unlike anything I've heard or experienced before. It literally was like we'd been in a time vortex or something, and that hours in the forest were only minutes in the rest of the world. The feeling was very strange, and it stuck with me for the rest of the camp. And then I looked up. I'm a police officer verified on our protect and serve in the southern US in a suburban department of about 100 sworn officers. I work in a college town. I've been on about 10 years now, made sergeant 4 years ago. But at the time of this story, I was just 2 years on, working night shift patrol. I've been lucky that not a lot has affected me, mentally anyway, during my career. I don't have kids. That's how it gets to you usually. You can build all the mental walls you want, but when you have an emotional connection with your kids and see something happening to kids, the walls mean nothing. Anyway, this one stuck with me. Still makes my hair stand on end, especially when it rains. It was September. Just after midnight, I get put on a call of shots fired. Now, normally these calls turn out to be either fireworks or perhaps a car backfiring, but mostly fireworks. So unless we get multiple calls on it, or a confirmed gunman or someone confirmed wounded, we just send one unit. That night it was me. The shots fired was reported around a college football stadium. This was during football season, so there were a bunch of really big white tents set up all around the parking lots for tailgaters. I notified dispatch that I was on scene and started rolling through the parking lots, casting my spotlight here and there. It was raining pretty heavily and hard to see. About halfway through the lots, my spotlight illuminated the silhouette of a man sitting in a folding chair under one of those big tents. I pulled closer and lit him up. and notified dispatch that I was out with one in the parking lot. His back was to me. He appeared to be hunched forward, as if his elbows were on his knees and his head leaning forward. I walked towards him and started calling out to him. Can't remember exactly what I said, but something like, "Hey man, you okay? You heard anything strange? Can you come talk to me?" He didn't move or answer. As I drew closer, I lit him up with my flashlight. I then noticed the outline of a shotgun on the pavement next to him. Combined with him not answering and the nature of the call, it was enough for me to break leather and have dispatch hold the channel. I kept calling to him as I approached, asking him to show me his hands, etc. 30 feet, 20 feet, 10 feet. My handgun Glock Model 22 has a Streamlight DLR-1 light on it, so I had him lit up. 6 feet, under the tent with him. 5 feet, 4 feet. I close on him, come around to the front of him. Shotgun suicides are difficult. Often if they put the barrel under their chin, the blast from the barrel will blow the gun out from under their chin before the shot ever hits them. There was a guy in my hometown that succeeded in a shotgun suicide, only because he did it in front of a pond. Put the barrel under his chin, pulled the trigger. Only managed to blow his face off. Coroner said he probably ran around screaming through the hole that used to be his mouth before he drowned in the pond. This guy succeeded. Blew his head clean off. You do this job long enough, you notice funny little details. His elbows were indeed resting on his knees. It was as though he blew his head off, set the shotgun on the ground next to him, and then leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees to think about what he'd done. About that time, I noticed that even though I was under the tent with him, it felt like it was still raining. And then I looked up. Home alone with my old dog. Although it doesn't seem like it, this happened quite a while back. Probably over 10 years ago. I was in the later years of high school and was home alone. My parents were at a wedding that required them to stay at a hotel, and my brother worked the night shift. At that time, my family lived in a very well-known East Coast city in a blue-collar neighborhood that was starting to take a nosedive. As a teenager, I was a bit of a loner. I wasn't a nerd or anything. I was a big dude who had friends and went on dates, but I'm a natural introvert, so I cherished the rare alone time that I got. This weekend I was looking forward to engaging in my normal empty house routine. Play some PlayStation on the big screen TV, then order a late takeout dinner pizza or Chinese and pig out while watching some Dragon Ball Z. Then around 2 a.m., fall asleep on the couch with my old dog, Cecil. Cecil was a beagle who was as old as the hills and had been in our family for about 8 years. He was quiet and peaceful and spent his time begging for food and sleeping. Unlike most beagles, Cecil never howled or barked. He was more than content to rest his head on your lap and spend the night there. Anyway, back to the story. It's approximately 1 a.m. I had just finished the last slice of pizza and was dozing off on the couch when I hear a bang coming from the back alleyway. I didn't think much of it. Anyone who has lived in a city knows noises happen at all moments of the night. Cecil's head popped up off my lap and the hair on his back stood up. He was always a bit skittish, so I calmed him down and started dozing off again. Not more than 2 minutes later, I hear another bang, and Cecil did something I never seen him do before. He leapt off the couch and ran like the wind towards the door leading to the basement, barking and growling like a dog twice his size. The look on his face reminded me of German Shepherd K9 unit. I'd never seen him like that before, which got my adrenaline pumping. Through the dog's barking, I can now make out a persistent banging. There was a seldom used door in the basement that led to our back alleyway. It was old and rusted and was hard to open, even with a key, and it made a lot of noise. I suddenly realized that someone was trying to break into my house through my basement door. Quick little bit of context for anyone who hasn't lived in a bad neighborhood. If someone tries to get into your house and moves on after they realize the door is locked, they want your stuff. If someone is persistently trying to get into your house despite the door being locked, well, they want you. Knowing this, I rush upstairs to grab the heavy wood baseball bat that I keep under my bed for situations like this. Then I head down my to basement. I probably should have ran, but I was a macho teenager with a tough guy complex, and plus I had nowhere to go. While I'm heading down the stairs to my basement, Cecil blows past me with the speed and aggression of a dog half his age. Suddenly, I hear a man's voice say OFCK, and the banging stopped. I didn't call the cops or anyone else, which was probably the dumbest thing I've ever done. I just sat up for the rest of the night with a bat in hand. My brother came home that morning, and I told him what had happened. We went to the basement door to take a look, and when we gave it a tug to open it, the whole door fell off. This psycho was one good shove away from getting in my house, but old Cecil scared him off. I'm pretty sure that lazy fat old dog saved my life. When I tell this story to people, they dismiss his actions as a dog doing what a dog was supposed to do. But when I tell you that Cecil never barked or moved that fast in his life, you can take that to the bank. It was almost like he knew the urgency, like he knew that door was gonna give. A few years back, we had to have him put down because he just had no will to live anymore. Before the injection, I got a moment alone with him. I thanked him one last time for his friendship and for what he did that night. At this point, I was a grown man with a wife and kids. I'm convinced none of that would have happened without old Cecil. Thanks, pal. I miss ya. First and only hitchhiker I will ever pick up. So last Friday, I-25F had a little time to kill before picking my kids up from school. And it was a gorgeous day, so I decided to spend some time cruising some back roads in my hometown small, rural listening to music. I passed this guy with his thumb out trying to catch a ride, and I almost picked this guy up. He looked to be about late 30s, early 40s, carrying a fishing pole and a backpack. Pretty innocent looking, I guess. But see, I'm a lone female, and have been taught with hundreds of hitchhiker gone wrong stories that you just keep driving. So I kept driving. And as I'm driving, I'm having this internal dialogue of guilt about my decision not to pick up this guy. You know, if I was hitchhiking, I'd hope someone would pick me up. And, I mean, really, what's the worst that could happen? That mixed with my new self-improvement goal of doing the things that scare me as often as possible, led me to the conclusion that if when I looped back around and he was still walking, I would pick him up. Sure enough, about 10 minutes later, he was still there. I was feeling a little nervous pulling over getting him, but what was I going to do? Peel out while he was trying to get in my vehicle. As soon as he gets in, I realize I have probably made a horrible mistake. 1. Because he seemed like he was tweaking balls and smelled god awful too. Because this dude was looking at me like I was a feast, and he was starved. I didn't realize exactly how rattled I was with my decision until he asked me for a smoke, and my hands were shaking so bad, I barely pulled one out of my pack without breaking it. Driving made it easier to hide my nerves, but I was internally freaking out and trying to decide how I would beat this guy's ass if he tried anything. His name is Wayne, and he lives about 5 minutes from where I picked him up. Meanwhile, he's telling me how he lost his license due to Dewey's and how he is living in this house with an old man. He tried to get him to come with him, but he didn't want to come, etc. He's also trying to talk me into hanging out at said house with him and come over and drink with him the next day. When I finally get him to his destination, it's a little shack-like thing surrounded by all these junk cars and shit. He gets out and is trying still to get me to come inside with him. I tell him no and leave. I'm feeling really relieved and a little proud that I faced a fear of mine. Fast forward to Monday, my instructor says, "Holy shit. Apparently someone got murdered down the so and such road. Do you know anyone down that way?" I say, "Wow, that's really ironic. I took a hitchhiker down that road Friday. His name was Wayne, I think." Probably wasn't 15 minutes later when I see old Wayne's picture on Facebook saying the TBI has picked him up for stabbing someone to death at the very house I dropped him off at Friday. Graphic information of how he stabbed him in the lungs, and the victim bled out in that little shack, and the old man he was living with doesn't even exist. I swear I'll never pick up another hitchhiker in my life. TL, doctor, the first time I ever got the balls to pick up a hitchhiker. He turned out to be a murderer whom I conveniently deposited at the scene of the crime. I think I am someone's true scary story. So, while this is not a scary thing that happened to me, I thought it might help illustrate that sometimes when strange scary things just happen, these things are probably scary to one person and completely embarrassing for the other. Over a year ago, I agreed to help a close friend, we'll call her Kay, move. There wasn't much to move as she was just renting a room in a house. She had gotten everything over to her new place, but needed some help getting her bed into her room. I was working late. Kay asked if after work I would mind coming by her old place, helping load the mattress into her car, then follow her to her new place where we could unload it. I agreed, and later that night, around 9:30 p.m., I arrived at her place. I do not know why I didn't just get the address of the new place and put it into my phone. Hubris is the most likely answer, or an overestimation of my ability to follow another person from one location to another. While I was following her car, when we left the main road, I started to realize we were turning and taking side streets a lot. I thought she had gotten lost herself, and I was looking forward to laughing about it once we arrived. We ending up deep in a neighborhood that was definitely not the one I thought she had told me she moved to, but I kept following her. After a few minutes, we turned into a townhouse complex. She pulled up into a parking spot, and I pulled up next to her. I was about to roll down my window to ask if she had gotten lost when I saw that it was not my friend I had been following. The woman whose car I had been following looked scared. Once she saw that I was a very small woman about the same age as her, she didn't look scared anymore. She looked pissed. I was going to apologize and explain what had happened, but then realized she didn't care. I had scared her. I hoped she could tell from my demeanor that I was sorry. I drove away, called Kay, and got the address of her new house. I feel bad that my complete inability to know where the hell I am probably made that woman really upset. It was probably confusing, and there is a small chance that not knowing why some random person followed her at 10 p.m. for several minutes has led to her think something more dangerous or horrible happened. In reality, it was just me. A person with no sense of direction just mistook her car for someone else. I have never seen anything on here that resembles this story, but from her pal. If you were this person, I am so sorry. I was and am very embarrassed. I know that we all have our own histories, and for some people, getting followed could have been very upsetting. I really hope this was not the case, but I do hope you got a story you could tell people out of it. I know I did. The first thing that happened to me on my grandmother's farm. I was about 11 when this happened. My older cousin Daniel, about 13, and I were playing hide and seek outside in my grandmother's yard. She owned a large farm in Tennessee, just over 1,000 acres, and I grew up there my entire life, and so did Daniel. So it was nothing for us to wander off and play in areas that probably weren't very safe for the average kid, but we knew the property like the back of our hand. It just so happened that the day before this happened, a lot of trees were cut down to make room for a new mobile home by the roadside that she intended to rent out for extra income. Daniel and I naturally gravitated toward this new unfamiliar landscape to play because it was something new to explore. All of the trees had been stripped of their branches and placed in logging trucks and hauled off. The branches, however, were all piled in a tangled mess about 50 feet wide and 15 feet tall. They were packed so densely that you couldn't see through them from one side to the other. It was during about the half-hour mark, when it was my turn to find Daniel, that I began to suspect that he was hiding in the woods deeper than our stated rules allowed. I remember calling his name for several minutes and hearing nothing but a quiet giggle coming from the woods. I was in the newly cut clearing looking into the woods and getting more upset by the minute. Finally, I announced as loudly as I could, that if he wasn't going to play fairly, then I was going in to get a glass of tea and watch television with Grandma. I started back up the hill towards the house. It was at the moment I was walking past the brush pile, basically centered beside it, that I heard an unfamiliar voice. You gave up quickly. I stopped. I called out, Daniel? It didn't sound like Daniel, but the voice responded, Yes, I am Daniel. I am inside of the limbs. I looked at the brush pile and didn't see anyone. Again I heard the odd voice call out, If you do not see me, then you have not found me, and I will have won the game. I stepped closer and yelled out to the voice, Why are you talking so funny? The voice replied, I am inside of all of the limbs. Look inside and you will see me, Daniel. Something felt really strange about the way this guy was talking, but 11-year-old me just rationalized it thinking, maybe his voice sounds different behind the shrubbery, and he sounds like he's talking funny because his voice sounds different. I stepped up to the edge of the brush pile and pulled the branches apart to look inside, and there was Daniel. His head was turned toward the top of the hill, but his body was facing me. I yelled out, I caught you. His head shifted toward me, and he had the single most disgusting smile I've ever seen to this very day. Imagine if someone has the absolute worst of intentions, and they're trying to hide behind a fake innocent smile to gain your trust, but they couldn't help their glee with the thought that they may have fooled you. That's the best way I can describe the smile. I was so shocked by this wicked facial expression on my cousin's face that I froze in place. The hairs on my neck and arms all raised, and I could suddenly feel my blood running through my body like the temperature had dropped inside my veins. I stammered through my words. How did you get in there? He responded, I fell into the inside of the limbs, cousin. I will need you to give me help, or I will continue to be trapped. I didn't notice this time how oddly he phrased his sentences, and it only occurred to me afterward that his lips were not moving when he spoke. He never changed his face from the twisted, unnerving smile. I didn't immediately notice any of these things, because I was too distracted by the large stick that was plunged deeply into the side of his neck. I noticed in that moment that he had a slow, steady trickling stream of blood flowing from the half-dollar-sized stick in his neck and down across his right shoulder and down his chest. That was enough to jolt my feet awake, and before my brain realized I was trying to run, I was already halfway up the hill to my grandmother's house. When I burst through the door to my grandmother's living room, Daniel was curled up in a ball on the couch and crying hysterically. My grandmother was sitting beside him trying her best to get him to explain what was wrong, but all he would say is that there was a little boy in the woods who tagged him when he was hiding, and he thought it wasn't really me. He wouldn't say anything else. I was crying and shaken up by this point and told my grandmother what I had seen. She made both of us some lunch and then called my uncle to come pick Daniel up. I stayed at my grandmother's house that night, and I bet she asked me what happened 100 times. She asked so many questions, it was if she were committing it to memory. I remember being relieved that she believed me, but at the same time I just wanted her to tell me it was all in my imagination and help me forget about it. The next day, my grandmother set the brush pile on fire, and I watched for hours from the safety of the living room window as it slowly deteriorated into a pile of ash and ember. My cousin never did tell me what really happened to him that day. He refuses to talk about it. I will say this though, he wouldn't talk to me for a year and a half after that day. We were so close when we were little, but that event, whatever the hell it was, it drove a wedge between us that changed our relationship forever.